du Conseil de sécurité tenue par visioconférence est ouverte. Je voudrais saisir cette occasion pour rendre hommage au nom du Conseil à son Excellence M. Dian Jani, représentant permanent de l'Indonésie, qui a assuré la présidence du Conseil de sécurité pendant le mois d'août avec brio et compétence. Je suis certain de me faire l'interprète de tous les membres du Conseil en exprimant mes sincères remerciements à l'ambassadeur Jani et à son équipe pour le grand talent diplomatique avec lequel ils ont mené les travaux du Conseil le mois dernier. L'ordre du jour provisoire de la présente séance est la situation en Libye. L'ordre du jour est adopté. Conformément à l'article 37 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite la représentante de la Libye, le représentant de la Libye, monsieur l'ambassadeur et chers frères, à participer à la présente session. Il en est ainsi décidé. Conformément à l'article 39 du règlement intérieur provisoire du Conseil, j'invite Madame Stephanie Williams, représentante spéciale par intérim du secrétaire général et chef de la mission d'appui des Nations Unies en Libye, à participer à la présente séance. Il en est également ainsi décidé. Le Conseil de sécurité va maintenant aborder l'examen du point 2 de l'ordre du jour. J'appelle l'attention des membres du Conseil sur le rapport du secrétaire général sur la mission d'appui des Nations Unies en Libye, publié sous la cote S-2020-832. À la présente séance, le Conseil de sécurité entendra des exposés présentés par Madame Williams et par son Excellence M. Gunther Soter, ambassadeur et représentant permanent adjoint de l'Allemagne, en sa qualité de président du comité du Conseil de sécurité, créé par la résolution 1970-2011 concernant la Libye. Je donne à présent la parole à Madame Stephanie Williams. Madame Williams, vous avez la parole.
Mr. President, Excellencies, allow me to congratulate Niger for assuming the presidency of the Security Council during the month of September and for giving me the opportunity to brief this council today. It is becoming a regrettable cliché to appear before you and warn that Libya is at a critical juncture, but yet I am compelled to pronounce these same words again today. Libya is indeed at a decisive turning point. Your support, not only in words, but most importantly in action, will help determine whether the country descends into new depths of fragmentation and chaos or progresses towards a more prosperous future. Mr. President, Excellencies, on the ground, an uneasy standoff continues around Sirte, imperiling the lives of the city's 130,000 vulnerable inhabitants, as well as the country's vital oil infrastructure, which comprises its economic lifeline. While the front lines have remained relatively quiet since June, both the Libyan Arab Armed Forces, the LAAF, and forces under the control of the Government of National Accord continue to benefit from the regrettable assistance of foreign sponsors to stockpile advanced weaponry and equipment. Since the Secretary General last briefed you, on 8th of July, some 70 resupply flights landed in eastern airports in support of the LAAF, while 30 resupply flights were dispatched to airports in western Libya in support of the GNA. Similarly, around 9 cargo vessels docked in western ports in support of the GNA, while a reported 3 cargo vessels arrived in support of the LAAF. Foreign sponsors are fortifying their assets at key Libyan air bases in the east and west. The activity described above constitutes an alarming breach of Libya's sovereignty, a blatant violation of the UN arms embargo, not to mention the commitments undertaken by the Berlin Conference participants. The mission continues to receive reports of large-scale presence of foreign mercenaries and operatives, further complicating local dynamics and chances of a future settlement. While the rate of incidents and accidents has decreased from booby traps, including IEDs, landmines, and explosive remnants of war, communities. As of the 24th of August, a total of 61 people have been killed and 113 people injured, of which 107 are civilians. The UN continues to support the authorities to develop and implement strategies to ensure the safe, dignified, and voluntary returns of people to their homes. Reports of imminent offenses and reliance on social media networks to spread those rumors exacerbate the risk of miscalculation. As a sign of increased volatility, localized tensions among armed groups, most recently in the cities of El Asaba, Sirte, and neighboring localities, are on the rise with allegations of unlawful arrests and detention, abuses of power, and targeting of civilians being widely shared with the mission. These developments make the requirement for a genuine DDR program even more urgent. On the 26th of August at night, General Haftar's forces launched Grad rockets towards areas in which GNA forces were operating near Sirte. And last night, there were similar reports of rockets launched by forces affiliated with General Haftar. The rockets did not cause any damage or injuries, but are a breach of the ceasefire that General Haftar's spokesperson himself said he signed up to in June. With the stakes so high, any such reckless action risks igniting large-scale confrontation with the devastating consequences this would entail. It is imperative that you use your influence to impress on all sides that now is the time for restraint. Mr. President, Excellencies, instability is further compounded by degraded socioeconomic conditions, fueling popular unrest and threatening the fragile calm required to advance our security and political discussions. The partial lifting of the oil blockade announced by the LAAF on 18 August had a minimal impact on the severe energy crisis faced by the country, as it only applied to the removal of condensates from eastern stores. While this allowed the National Oil Corporation to continue providing natural gas for eastern power plants, the blockade otherwise remains unreasonably in place, including a forced shutdown of all domestic refineries. As the international price of fuel increases, so do domestic fuel shortages, which negatively impact on multiple sectors of the economy, including electricity. In the nation's capital, residents too often go without electricity for up to 20 hours per day. We must make the full lifting of the oil blockade, which has been in place since January, a top priority. The immiseration of the Libyan people is further compounded by the debilitating effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, which appears to be spiraling out of control. The number of confirmed cases has more than doubled in the last 2 weeks, with 15,156 cases and 250 recorded deaths as of the 1st of September. Exponential increases are a worrying trend, with community transmission now reported in some of Libya's main cities, including Tripoli and Sebha. We are, however, looking at the problem through a keyhole. as persistent shortages in testing capabilities, adequate healthcare facilities, and contact tracing mean that the true scale of the pandemic in Libya is likely to be much higher. Handling of the pandemic is constrained by the fragmentation of health sector institutions, the extreme shortage of medical supplies and workers, as well as a funding shortage. Nearing full collapse after more than 9 years of conflict, the healthcare system is unable to respond to the additional weight placed by the COVID-19 patients, along with maintaining normal health services, including child immunization programs. The United Nations and our partners are at the forefront of supporting the national authorities through the provision of health supplies and personal protection equipment. We are also working closely with the authorities to build capacity of health workers, to destigmatize the virus and increase awareness to ensure people take the proper precautions to protect themselves. It is essential that Libyan authorities cooperate transparently in our joint fight to control this terrible plague. Mr. President, Excellencies, humanitarian access compounded by COVID-19 restriction measures remains a persistent challenge across the country. These challenges notwithstanding, the humanitarian organizations have reached more than 243,000 people with assistance since the beginning of this year. This includes support to 66,000 internally displaced people, 119,000 vulnerable conflict-affected Libyans and recent returnees, and 58,000 migrants and refugees. The socioeconomic impact of COVID-19, along with the protracted crisis and the deteriorating public services, continue to stretch the coping capacities of those in the most vulnerable circumstances, particularly the more than 1 million people estimated to be in need of humanitarian assistance in 2020. I remain concerned that migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers continue to attempt to cross the Mediterranean at great risk to their lives. I am deeply saddened by the recent deaths of 45 migrants and refugees in a single incident on 18th of August when their boat sank off of Libya's coast attempting to cross to Europe. More than 7,000 migrants and refugees have attempted this crossing this year, more than 300 of whom have died. Reports of delays in rescue and disembarkation highlight the need for a review of the European countries' approach to the situation and for a more humane and predictable disembarkation mechanism in line with the responsibilities placed on member states by international human rights law, as well as search and rescue obligations. Libya cannot be considered as a safe port for disembarkation. Many migrants and refugees that have been intercepted at sea have been returned to Libya and placed into detention. As of the 21st of August, almost 2,400 migrants and refugees are in official detention centers in Libya, where they are subjected routinely to grave human rights violations. Many more are in unofficial sites where the UN does not have access. I continue to urge for greater steps by the authorities against smugglers and traffickers and for finding alternatives to detention in Libya. UNSMIL welcomes the nomination by the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the 3 members of the independent fact-finding mission on Libya. We look forward to cooperating with them and assisting them in fulfilling their mission to document violations of international human rights and humanitarian law since 2016, and to address impunity for such violations and act as a deterrent. Sustainable peace in Libya will only be achieved through justice and accountability. Excellencies, Mr. President, all these elements are producing a fertile ground for social unrest across the country and confirm once more that the status quo is simply unsustainable. In recent days, Libyans have come out in force throughout the country, most notably in Tripoli, to express their anger and frustration over the lack of basic services, widespread water and power cuts, and rampant corruption. I have personally communicated the United Nations concerns to Libyan authorities at reports of excessive force used against peaceful demonstrators and reiterated our calls for the rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression to be respected. Those who have been arbitrarily detained by armed groups must be released. The surge in the use of hate speech and incitement to violence, occasionally stirred through foreign-based media outlets and electronic armies, appears designed to further divide Libyans, to increase polarization and tear at the country's social fabric at the expense of a Libyan solution. On the 29th of August, the situation morphed into an open political crisis when the Presidency Council suspended the Minister of Interior and expedited a governmental reshuffling, exposing underlying tensions that had resurfaced within the Western camp as the threat posed by General Haftar's offensive subsided. Now is the time to join hands as efforts are being undertaken to reach a settlement that would aim to preserve the country's sovereignty and integrity, as well as to address long-standing economic shortcomings and the need to implement lasting DDR and security sector reforms. Mr. President, Excellencies, the disturbing trends I have just described should all compel us to press for immediate de-escalation and return to the political process before the fragile window of opportunity created by the informal halt in hostilities dissipates to the detriment of the Libyans first and foremost, but also to the detriment of international peace and security. Glimmers of hope have appeared from within Libya, which UNSMIL, with the support of the Berlin-established International Follow-up Committee on Libya, is working on nurturing and using as an anchor to its own efforts. Rejuvenation of political activity in the West and the East has enabled the emergence of a constituency advocating for change, for a Libyan dialogue to restore the country's sovereignty and to disentangle themselves from broader regional and international struggles. On the 21st of August, President of the Presidency Council, Siraj, and House of Representatives Speaker, Saleh, issued simultaneous yet separate statements calling for an immediate ceasefire, lifting of the oil blockade, and a return to the political process under UN auspices. These statements were met by overwhelming expressions of support coming from Libyans from all political affiliations and international partners alike. I remain optimistic that, with many points of convergence between both declarations, we may have a chance to move forward with regard to intra-Libyan political and security discussions while continuing to engage with other key political and military forces across the country. Since the last briefing, I have conducted a number of missions to shore up support for the UN's efforts in Libya, including visits to the United Kingdom, Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt. Earlier today, I met with Tunisian President Said to specifically thank the Tunisian government for its unstinting support for the UN's operations in Libya. While all of my regional and international interlocutors, with all of them, I secured commitments to assist UNSMIL in our task to bring the Libyan parties together and to work to maintain calm on the ground. Libya's neighbors are directly threatened by the continuing instability and influx of weapons and mercenaries. I have also met directly with President Siraj, House of Representatives Speaker Saleh, and Higher State Council President Mishri, as well as a number of their representatives and other key figures. I would like to thank the Swiss government for their superb facilitation of our meetings with Libyans in these difficult times. At all levels, the mission is engaging with Libyan stakeholders to counsel calm and to build the bridges which will ease the political process. In Rat, on 18 August, the relatively high turnout recorded in the municipal elections, despite COVID-19 related constraints, demonstrated the Libyans' determination to exercise their rights to elect their representatives. It is therefore not surprising that spoilers would seek to sabotage further such exercises, as happened in the city of Traven on the 25th of August, when an armed group affiliated with the LAAF forced the suspension of the vote. These green shoots of democracy must be protected. I salute the tireless efforts of the Central Commission of Municipal Council Elections as it continues preparations for elections in a new group of municipalities, starting with Misrata tomorrow. On the military front, UNSMIL continued discussions with delegations of both sides under the auspices of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission and moved past areas of convergence identified previously to adjust to new dynamics on the ground. As of today, and since the 8th of July, we have convened 3 virtual rounds of discussions with the GNA and 2 with the LAAF delegation in an attempt to urge for immediate de-escalation. I encourage both sides to consider the incremental establishment of a demilitarized area starting with Sirte, supported by a comprehensive set of confidence-building measures. This proposal would also comprise a small international Libyan joint ceasefire monitoring mechanism. While divergences of views and distrust between both sides remain high, I call on you to encourage the parties to refrain from insisting on unrealistic and maximalist positions and to participate in good faith for the sake of their country. Addressing the economic drivers of the conflict is at the core of any hope for a sustainable settlement. To create the necessary confidence required for a frank and open discussion over the transparent allocation of resources, UNSMIL had long pushed for an international audit of both branches of the Central Bank of Libya, as requested by Prime Minister Siraj in a letter to the Secretary General in July of 2018. I am pleased to report that, thanks to your support,
Have you paused the broadcast again? Great.
this process will advance efforts to unify the 2 branches of the Central Bank of Libya, enhance accountability, and create the transparency needed to inform discussions on the equitable management of revenue. Mr. President, Excellencies, I remind you that 16 months ago, we were on the cusp of a broadly gauged Libyan national conference that would have established the framework to replace the current divided political structures with one that would have more clearly reflected the legitimate aspirations of all Libyans. That effort was upended by those who falsely believed they could achieve their aims through the use of force. After 14 months of needless death and destruction, they did not succeed. The use of oil as a weapon of war has only exacerbated the misery of the Libyan people and propelled the country towards economic
Je donne maintenant la parole à son Excellence, Monsieur Gunther Sauter. Monsieur Gunther, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, mon président. Thank you, Abari, Mr. President. In accordance with paragraph 24E of Resolution 1970 of 2011 of the 26th of February 2011, I have the honor to report to the Security Council on the work of the committee established by the same resolution. The report covers the period from the 20th of May to the 2nd of September 2020, during which time the committee conducted its work using the silence procedure. The members of the committee also met on the 28th of July in an informals format via closed VTC with 18 invited member states, including Libya and 3 regional organizations. The purpose of this event, which was a follow-up to the 3rd formal meeting of the committee held on the 30th of August 2019, was to continue to strengthen the dialogue on the effective implementation of the sanctions measures imposed by the Security Council in relation to Libya, with a focus on the implementation of the arms embargo and to seek information regarding actions taken thereto. I will now report on committee activity and developments as they relate to the individual sanctions measures. With respect to the arms embargo, the committee received 2 written updates from the panel focusing on aspects of implementation. This was followed by information on 3 entities and 1 individual whom the panel considered to have met sanctions designation criteria. The committee received a letter from Turkey that addressed inter alia the application of the authorizations contained in Resolution 2292 of 2016, as most recently extended by Resolution 2526 of 2020, for the implementation of the arms embargo on the high seas off the coast of Libya. The committee also received a letter from Tunisia concerning one of the panel's updates. The committee approved an exemption request invoking paragraph 9C of Resolution 1970 of 2011 submitted by Malta, and is currently considering a request for guidance related to the applicability of the arms embargo from Tunisia. Concerning the measures aimed at preventing illicit export of petroleum, including crude oil and refined petroleum products, the committee received notifications from its Libyan focal point, pursuant to Resolution 2146 of 2014, as well as from the panel of experts regarding the activities of the Gabon flag tanker, the MV Jal Laxmi, which had been adrift outside Libyan territorial waters with the alleged aim of loading heavy fuel oil and maritime gas oil outside the umbrella of the Libyan National Oil Company, NOC. The committee dispatched a letter to the flag state. Ultimately, the vessel did not berth at Tobruk port, and it left the international waters off the coast of Libya. In connection with the asset freeze, the committee received 2 letters from the Libyan Investment Authority, LIA, as a listed entity pertaining to different aspects of its functioning, and exchanged additional correspondence with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia on a matter related to the LIA, and in this connection received a letter from the panel of experts. No negative decision was taken by the committee in relation to 3 exemption notifications invoking paragraph 19A of Resolution 1970 of 2011, submitted by Bahrain, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. The committee also received a letter from the panel of experts on the subject of one of the aforementioned paragraph 19A exemption notifications. In connection with the travel ban, the committee received an exemption notification invoking paragraph 16C of Resolution 1970 of 2011, submitted by the Russian Federation regarding the imminent travel of Mr. Abu Sayed Umar Dorda, a listed individual. The committee was subsequently informed that the travel would not be taking place. The committee also approved an exemption request invoking paragraph 16A of Resolution 1970 of 2011, submitted by Ms. Safia Farkash Al-Barasi. On the 15th of June, the committee dispatched a note verbal to all member states in follow-up to paragraph 8 of Resolution 2509 of 2020, which called upon them to report to the committee on the steps they had taken to implement effectively the travel ban and asset freeze measures in relation to all individuals on the Libya sanctions list. The committee received 5 implementation reports since then. During the reporting period, the committee also received information from the panel of experts on a second individual whom the panel believes meets additional designation criteria. Mr. President, I would also like to note that the committee received the interim report of the panel of experts on Libya on the 20th of August. Members of the committee intend to discuss it in the coming days. In conclusion, Mr. President, I would like to highlight the importance of the full implementation by member states of all sanctions measures and encourage them to continue supporting the work of the panel of experts. With regard to the work of the panel, I would like to recall the privileges and immunities enjoyed by experts on mission under the 1946 Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. I would also like to reiterate the committee's commitment to contribute to promote peace and stability in Libya. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur Sauter, pour votre présentation. Are we going to allow Mrs. Williams to finish her presentation now, or shall I continue? I now give the floor to Mrs. Williams to end her presentation. Mrs. Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have one more sentence, which is to say, it is therefore clear that the only path out is through dialogue and compromise, leading to a comprehensive political settlement and culminating in national elections. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Williams, pour votre présentation. Je donne maintenant la parole aux membres du Conseil qui souhaitent faire une déclaration. Je donne la parole au représentant du Royaume-Uni. Monsieur Jonathan, vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et mes félicitations pour votre présidence dans ce mois de septembre. Can I also please begin by thanking Acting Special Representative of the Secretary General Williams for her briefing and for all the work that UNSMIL do. Stephanie, you have just delivered a powerful and compelling statement about the situation in Libya. You set out, I'm afraid, a bleak picture with few glimmers of light. But I want to thank you, Stephanie, for your honesty and also for your service to the people of Libya and to the United Nations. Mr. President, the situation in Libya is one of the biggest challenges that this Council faces. The international community, we, are collectively failing. We are failing to meet the obligations and commitments that we have freely entered into. We are failing to enforce the obligations and commitments laid out by this Council. The humanitarian backdrop is particularly concerning, as is the rise in COVID-19 cases. The people of Libya have had enough. as we have seen demonstrated again in recent days. But Mr. President, let us try to pick up on one of the glimmers of light in Stephanie's statement. And the United Kingdom welcomes the statements of the 21st of August by the President of the Presidency Council, Fayez al-Sarraj, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Aguila Saleh, calling for a ceasefire. The Libyan people have been clear about their desire for peace. And as the events since April 2019 have demonstrated, there is no military solution. These announcements mark a significant step on the road towards sustained peace, security, and stability. We commend both sides for their commitment to the political process and thank UNSMIL for its leadership in engaging with and facilitating dialogue between Libyan parties. Mr. President, these statements alone are not enough. This opportunity must be seized by all involved in the conflict and the Libyan people to make progress in achieving sustainable peace. So now is the time for restraint from those on all sides of the conflict, and for all Libyan parties to take their cue from these statements and engage constructively to implement them. And Mr. President, we need a reinvigorated UNSMIL, able to take forward this and any other opportunities. Let me say at this point that we are concerned by the rapidly shrinking space for Libyan women to voice their opinions and participate in political life and post-conflict reconstruction, with some women subjected to physical threats and attacks apparently linked to their public roles. In the 20th anniversary year of UNSCR 1325, we welcome the Acting Special Representative's commitment to the full and effective participation of women in political and public life, including all political processes and peace-building initiatives. As remember, colleagues, this is about not only what is right to do, it's about what is effective. Mr. President, I said that the international community, including members of this council, were not honouring commitments freely entered into or observing the obligations laid down by this council. International backers must commit to the departure from Libya of all foreign forces and mercenaries, and must provide the Libyan parties with the space and support needed to achieve a ceasefire, engage meaningfully in the UN-led political process, and secure an inclusive political agreement which places the people of Libya at its centre. We welcomed and continued engagement by the parties in the UN-led 5+5 dialogue, which the United Kingdom supports as co-chair of the Security Working Group. And we urge the parties to have the courage to make the compromises needed. We fully support UNSMIL's efforts to de-escalate the situation around Sirte. A demilitarized solution in Sirte could serve as a foundation for a broader ceasefire. But we remain highly concerned at the ongoing conflict, fueled by reckless international intervention and violations of the arms embargo, through the arming and supplying of the parties and the activities of the Wagner Group and other foreign mercenaries. We support the work of the panel of experts fully and call for the external backers of the parties to comply with the embargo and the commitments they made at the Berlin conference. And that applies to all external backers. Mr. President, we are troubled by the ongoing impact of the conflict on human rights and humanitarian issues, exacerbated by the worsening COVID-19 situation as set out by Stephanie. The increase in civilian casualties documented by UNSMIL from April to June is unacceptable, as are the continued attacks on medical facilities, ambulances and medical personnel, and attacks on schools. We reiterate our concern at casualties resulting from mines, booby traps, and improvised explosive devices left by withdrawing forces aligned with the LNA. We continue to call for the mass grave sites at Tarhuna to be secured until a proper investigation can be conducted. We reiterate our condemnation of all human rights violations and abuses and violations of international humanitarian law, including indiscriminate attacks, unlawful killings, sexual and gender-based violence, the silencing of journalists, activists and human rights defenders, and the mistreatment of vulnerable people, including in particular migrants. We're concerned by reports that civilians were fired upon and abducted during recent protests. It is vital that the rights to peaceful assembly, protest and freedom of expression are upheld. And we welcome the appointment of the members of the International Fact-Finding Mission for Libya to investigate human rights violations and abuses, and reiterate our calls on all parties to allow the mission access across the whole country. We support the calls to resume oil production in the recent statements from the GNA and House of Representatives. We welcome the independent audit of the 2 central bank branches as a vital step towards improved transparency and reunification. The oil blockade only serves to harm the Libyan people. We must move forward with resuming production in the interests of all Libyans and the Libyan economies. Mr. President, I want to echo Acting SRSG Williams' concluding remarks. There is no military solution in Libya. Those who deliberately undermined the peace process in April 2019 thought that a military campaign could work. 15 months later, it has been proved again and again and again that it cannot. All that has been achieved in the meantime is death and misery amid a huge increase in weaponry into Libya. So let me once again urge the Libyan parties and their international backers to listen to the cries of the Libyan people for peace and to put the interests of the Libyan people above their own narrow, selfish interests. Let all commit to a lasting ceasefire, and let us empower a strong UNSMIL to take forward negotiations on peace and lasting security. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Royaume-Uni pour sa déclaration. Je voudrais à présent inviter le représentant de la Russie à prendre la parole. Vassili, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Mr. President. We welcome the delegation of Niger as President of the Security Council for the month of September and wish you, the Ambassador Abari, every success. And we also thank the Indonesian delegation and the permanent representative, Dian Jani, for the efforts and leadership of the Council during the challenging month of August. Mr. President, we thank Acting SRSG Williams for the report on the situation in Libya. We also thank Günther Sauter, the chairman of the 1970 Security Council Sanctions Committee, for the report on the work of this body. Russia remains convinced that the Libyan crisis can be resolved only with political and diplomatic means. There is no alternative to a peaceful solution. We have consistently advocated the establishment of a sustainable cessation of hostilities in Libya and an end to the bloodshed that has been tearing the country apart since NATO's intervention in 2011. In this regard, the recent statements by the head of the Government of National Accord, Mr. Sarraj, and the head of the Libyan Parliament, Mr. Saleh, give reasons for some cautious optimism. We call on the parties to launch the Libyan national dialogue as soon as possible within the mechanisms created by the Berlin Conference and approved by the Security Council Resolution 2510. We confirmed this position during the most recent teleconference of the Berlin Conference Follow-up Committee, as well as in contacts with interested parties. At the same time, we proceed from the principle that we have repeatedly voiced that any decisions and recommendations must be coordinated and approved by the Libyans themselves. Without this, no success can be achieved. Although the military situation has stabilized, we cannot exclude new escalation at any moment. The ongoing armed conflict has a negative impact on the socio-economic and humanitarian situation of the population. Mass protests were held in Tripoli demanding urgent measures to remedy the situation. We are also very concerned with the rapid increase in the coronavirus cases. We call on the Libyan authorities to respond promptly to these challenges and on the international community to continue humanitarian assistance. We are worried about reports of ongoing violations of the arms embargo in Libya. We are convinced that the supply of weapons and foreign terrorist fighters to this country must be stopped. Pumping Libya with weapons, which started back in 2011, as well as the presence of Western military specialists with unknown missions, further fuels the crisis and accordingly increases radical sentiments and the spread of the terrorist threat throughout the African continent. Mr. President, we reiterate our approach to peaceful settlement in Libya. This process should be Libyan-owned and Libyan-led. All issues, including those related to the situation around Sirte and Al-Jufra, should be discussed within established mechanisms. progress on military and economic tracks could become a door opener for inclusive dialogue on political modalities of the comprehensive settlement. We presume that in the current critical situation, all states that have leverage over the warring Libyan parties must do their best to help launch the negotiation process. In addition to statements on the ceasefire, a number of peace initiatives has been recently voiced, including by the head of the Libyan Parliament, Mr. Aguila Saleh, and the President of Egypt, Mr. Al-Sisi, supported by many influential states. We believe that the aforementioned ideas could form a basis for political discussions within the framework of the process of a comprehensive Libyan settlement. On our part, we will continue contacts with countries interested in stabilizing Libya, including Turkey, on the basis of the statement adopted by our two countries on July 22nd. The most recent round of such contacts was held on August 31st. At the same time, we stress that the central and leading role in the Libyan settlement belongs to the United Nations. We believe that a new special representative can help move forward the political process as well as to coordinate all existing initiatives and ideas. We call on the Secretary General to appoint a special representative as soon as possible and on the UN Security Council members to contribute to this process, which has unjustifiably dragged on and obviously impedes international efforts. Mr. President, we've already heard accusations on Russian interference in Libya, and I'm sure that there will be a follow-up to the one that we originally heard. In that regard, I would like again to say, which I said already in our previous statements, that we have repeatedly reiterated that not a single Russian serviceman is currently in the combat zone in Libya. There are no reports of them participating in armed clashes or dying there. Behind all this, there is a clear desire to divert attention from the destructive role in Libya of those who are most loud today in paying lip service to the fate of ordinary Libyans. Such behavior will not mislead the Libyans and their neighbors, who are well aware of who has in fact pushed the region into chaos. We are very much surprised that those who spread accusations about so-called Russian involvement in Libya turn a blind eye of their own military companies, military presence, both in the capacity of national armed forces and through private military companies, both in the west and east of Libya. They send weapons and ammunition to different armed groups, train them, and recruit mercenaries. We call on these delegations to stop these hypocritical accusations. And thank you, Mr. President.
Merci, Monsieur le représentant de la Russie. Je voudrais à présent inviter le représentant de l'Afrique du Sud à prendre la parole. Jerry, vous avez la parole. Votre micro est fermé.
Microphone, please.
Microphone, Jerry.
President, perhaps we can go to Belgium while we try to address the microphone issue with South Africa.
Thank you, Scott. Je voudrais à présent donner la parole au représentant de la Belgique. Vous avez la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que, en fait, je suis dit, and thank you very much, Mr. President. Could I just ask you, as my ambassador just fell out, but he'll be back in a moment, maybe also proceed to the next briefer until my ambassador is available.
Thank you. Je voudrais à présent inviter le représentant de l'Allemagne. L'ambassadeur Sauter, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Jonathan was speaking about glimmers of light in a dark context. let me start with the glimmers of light. We welcome the declarations in favor of a ceasefire by Prime Minister Sarraj and Speaker of the House of Representatives Saleh. This opens a rare window of opportunity. This gesture of compromise must now also feed into the 5+5 talks, and it must be translated into a lasting ceasefire agreement. This is an opportunity we must not miss. The coming days and weeks will be a test of national responsibility, including for Mr. Haftar and the LNA. Let me make this clear. Protracted rejection of talks is unacceptable. The 5+5 talks must continue constructively. We take note of the optimism expressed by UNSMIL in the recent report of the section. We must all support this approach. The country's wealth is the property of the Libyan people. Therefore, we call for an immediate lifting of the oil blockade by the LNA. Speaking about glimmers of hope, we wholeheartedly support Acting SRSG Stephanie Williams for her unwavering dedication. At the same time, we want to strongly underline we need to agree on a successor of Hassan Salameh very swiftly in this council. With a view to the upcoming mandate renewal, UNSMIL must be enabled to quickly react to provide the necessary support for monitoring a possible ceasefire and or a demilitarized zone. Now let me come to the gloomy elements. I want to enumerate three. The first one, Stephanie has already referred to the tensions within the GNA. We have noted with serious concern recent internal tensions in Tripoli, and we call on all government actors to respect the rule of law and to act responsibly for the common good. The second gloomy aspect I wish to address is the arms embargo and the violations of this embargo. It is foreign interference by a number of countries that keep reappearing in the reports of the panel of experts of the Libya Sanctions Committee that is fanning the flames of this conflict. Delivery of guns and bombs, of UAVs, of missiles and launch systems, of armored vehicles, of ground and air defense systems. This entire buildup of arms and military material is obvious, as is the harmful presence of foreign fighters and mercenaries. These blatant violations of the arms embargo must end. In this council, we frequently have exchanges on double standards and hypocrisy. We believe that this is a very good example, and we are extremely concerned by the fact that members of the security and participants of the Berlin conference are involved in this. We must therefore continue to increase pressure through targeted sanctions. With Operation EU NAVFOR Med-Irini, the EU has so far been the only actor implementing a mandate by this council to all member states and regional organizations. We need more credible international engagement to fight against arms embargo violations and violators. The third gloomy aspect I wish to touch upon is attacks against civilians and violations of international humanitarian law and human rights. The continued suffering of the civilian population remains alarming. We see a rising death toll of the civilian population due to mines, unexploded ordnance and victim-operated explosive devices left behind in southern Tripoli by General Haftar's forces. We are horrified by the discovery of multiple mass graves in Tahuna. The perpetrators must be found and brought to justice. We therefore commend UNSMIL for providing technical support to the Libyan government to conduct its investigation. As UNSMIL registered an increase in reports on human rights violations, we need to also support the mission and the Libyan people. Amidst the demonstrations Libya has witnessed during the past days, we call for the full preservation of the civil and political rights of all Libyans. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Allemagne pour sa déclaration. Je voudrais à présent redonner la parole au représentant de l'Afrique du Sud. Géry, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur President. First, I would like to congratulate Niger for the presidency of our council in September and reassure you, Mr. President, of our total support. But also thanks for launching the A3+1 season in the Security Council for the next 4-5 months, ending with Tunisia at the beginning of 2021. Likewise, we'd like to thank Indonesia for the skillful and principled management of the Security Council in August, but also for being the bridgehead between the European season and the A3+1 season. Thank you so much, Indonesia, for breaking that European season and ushering in the A3+1 season. President, we also want to welcome our colleague, Permanent Representative of Libya, to our meeting today and look forward for the usual incisive briefing on what is happening in his homeland. Mr. President, I want to thank the Acting Special Representative of Secretary General, Ms. Stephanie Williams, for her statement, briefing, that we really appreciate, and the statement as well as of the chair of the 1970 committee, Ambassador Gunter Suter, for their briefing. Allow me to begin by expressing South Africa's deep concern at the prevailing situation in Libya, as described by Ms. Stephanie Williams. The continued military confrontation and escalations, particularly in and around Sirte, in recent weeks, is of great concern to us. We call on all parties to cease all hostilities with immediate effect and heed the calls for the permanent and lasting ceasefire as called for by the parties. South Africa firmly believes this will create an environment for inclusive dialogue to pave the way towards a Libyan-led, Libyan-owned political process. In this regard, welcome both ceasefire announcement on Friday, 21st August 2020 by the Government of National Accord that indicated all, I quote, combat operations in all Libyan territories be halted, as well as the announcement to hold elections as early as March 2021 and continue to support the peace process as supported by the African Union through its Peace and Security Council, the High-Level Committee on Libya, and its contact group, as well as the work of the AU Special Envoy for Libya as they continue to engage with main stakeholders in Libya. Mr. President, the continued insecurity in Libya has further exacerbated the humanitarian and economic conditions on the ground, which have been compounded by COVID-19, as Ms. Williams briefed us earlier today. The report of alleged abuse and violations of international humanitarian law and human rights are worrisome. In this regard, we welcome the appointment of the members of the International Fact-Finding Mission to Libya, which will be crucial in ensuring that perpetrators are held accountable. Moreover, Libya's ailing economy, exacerbated by the continued blockade of oil export, is a worrying trend which does not serve the interest of all Libyans. We welcome calls for the resumption of oil production and for export to resume fully, which will bring in much needed revenue and improve the economic and financial situation for the benefits of all Libyans. We encourage continued talk to find substantial solutions to the economic challenges. Mr. President, in seeking a peaceful solution to the conflict, we wish to reiterate South Africa and African Union's support for the conclusion of the Berlin Conference as endorsed by Resolution 2510 of 2020. These processes are vital for the achievement of peace in Libya. In this regard, South Africa encouraged the continued support and commitment of the Security Council to the strengthening the cooperation of African Union and United Nations. It's of paramount importance to ensure common purpose to put an end to the conflict in Libya. Mr. President, despite repeated calls for strict adherence with the Arms Embargo, violations persist by both parties, as well as external players with an influx of weapons and foreign fighters into Libya. In this regard, we welcome the calls for the implementations of sanctions against those who violate the arms embargo. We appeal as South Africa to all countries concerned and those responsible for recruiting foreign fighters to immediately withdraw them from Libya and cease these activities. We recommend demobilization and militarization of those involved in the confrontations and possible integration of Libyan citizens into local societies, and for the foreign fighters to be repatriated to their countries of origin by those who brought them. Furthermore, the continued involvement of external actors remains a threat to territorial integrity and sovereignty of Libya. We therefore reiterate our call for an end to foreign interference in order to allow efforts to unify the state authority. Mr. President, in conclusion, we underscore the importance of the appointment of a new special representative of Secretary General, hopefully from Africa, who will oversee and support political process in Libya. We extend our full support to UNSMIL and the important work they continue to carry out through its mandate. In this context, we support the renewal of its mandate for another 12 years. And the Security Council should also bear in mind the Libyan ramification on the neighboring African countries. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant d'Afrique du Sud pour sa déclaration. Je voudrais à présent inviter le représentant du Royaume de Belgique à prendre la parole. Monsieur Kridelka, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Belgique vous félicite et vous souhaite bonne chance pour l'importante mission que vous assumez depuis hier au nom de votre cher pays, le Niger. I would like to thank also Ms. Williams for her briefing today and for her dedication to peace in Libya. I would like also to thank Ambassador Günther Sauter for his very first briefing as chair of the Libya Sanctions Committee, and thank also his predecessor, Ambassador Schulz, for his successful chairmanship. As recent demonstrations have shown, my dear colleagues, Mr. President, many Libyans aspire to peace, security, development, and an effective response to the COVID-19 pandemics. Therefore, Belgium welcomes the statements made on August the 21st by Mr. Serraj and Mr. Saleh regarding a ceasefire. We call on all actors, inside and outside Libya, to follow suit and stop the war logic. All mercenaries need to leave. No valid reason exists for not responding positively and immediately to these calls for a ceasefire. A dialogue remains the only sustainable solution to the crisis, and the parameters are well known. The Libyan political agreement, the principles agreed in Berlin, UNSMIL's 3 tracks approach, the Libyan crisis, and the Arms Embargo. All mercenaries need to leave. No valid reason exists for not responding positively and immediately to these calls for a ceasefire. A dialogue remains the only sustainable solution to the crisis, and the parameters are well known. The Libyan political agreement, the principles agreed in Berlin, UNSMIL's 3 tracks approach,
Apologies for the interruption. My ambassador will be online as soon as possible.
I apologize, Mr. President, for the Wi-Fi problems I have in my delegation. Would you allow me to continue my intervention, please?
Yes, please, you can continue.
Thank you. Belgium also welcomes the positive developments on the political and economic tracks, where the start of the audit of the central bank is to be highlighted. Progress on those three tracks will allow to address the complaints expressed by the demonstrators in recent days. Mr. President, the arms embargo continues to be outrageously disregarded. I want to be clear. There is no excuse for not respecting the arms embargo. Violating it means contributing to a spiral of violence, exacerbating tensions between Libyans, and severely undermining a durable exit from the crisis. More importantly, it means contributing to the loss of life of innocent civilians, Libyans, and also migrants. In this respect, I would like to commend efforts by the EU's naval operation Irini. This is only a part of the comprehensive effort the European Union and its member states are providing to support this UN-led process. EU High Representative Josep Borrell discussed those issues during his visit to Libya yesterday. Mr. President, all parties need to protect civilians. My country considers that widespread impunity will undermine a durable reconciliation amongst Libyans. National courts, transitional justice, and the ICC all have a complementary role to play. I welcome the establishment of a fact-finding mission by the Human Rights Council to investigate violations and abuses of international human rights law and international humanitarian law by all parties to the conflict. Belgium calls on all Libyan parties to extend their cooperation with this mission so that it can start its work in earnest. As for the mandate of UNSMIL that we will discuss in the coming days, Belgium considers that it needs to be strengthened in order to better ensure systematic monitoring and reporting of violence against children. Thanks to the work and the efforts of SRG, Virginia, UNICEF, and the UN country teams, we all know that those violences against children are widespread, and then UNSMIL's mandate needs to be strengthened in this regard. We are also deeply concerned by the continuous blockade of oil production, which has disastrous consequences for the economy of the country and for the population as a whole. Libya's natural resources belong to all Libyans, and their exploitation is vital to maintain the country's economy, particularly given the need to address the COVID-19 pandemics. I urge to respect the civilian nature of oil infrastructure and encourage further dialogue on how better sharing the revenues it generates. In that regard, I welcome the recent announcements and encourage further progress in order to lift the blockade and to scale up oil production. In closing, Mr. President, allow me to once again salute the courage and determination of the entire staff on UNSMIL and the whole country team. In that context, I would like to emphasize the urgent need for the appointment of a new special representative of the Secretary General. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant du Royaume de Belgique pour sa déclaration et voudrais à présent inviter le représentant de la Tunisie à prendre la parole. Monsieur l'ambassadeur Kais, vous avez la parole.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me first congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council for the month of September and wish you and your outstanding team every success in this responsibility. I would like also to express our appreciation and deep consideration to Indonesia for its successful presidency during the last month. We reiterate Tunisia's support to UNSMIL headed by Ms. Stephanie Williams, and we reaffirm Tunisia's commitment to facilitate the conduct of UNSMIL's operation, and we thank her for today's insightful briefing. Our thanks go equally to Germany for its engagement at the head of the sanction committee. Mr. President, as His Excellency the President of the Republic of Tunisia, Kais Saied, reiterated today when he received Ms. Stephanie Williams, there is no military solution to the crisis in Libya. And the only sustainable solution would be through an inclusive Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political settlement, putting an end to violence and escalation, addressing the root causes of the conflict, and alleviating the suffering of the Libyan people. The current situation, which is worsening continuously and threatening peace and security, is unacceptable and cannot keep going on forever. We call upon all the Libyan parties to maintain unity and resolve their differences through constructive dialogue, leading to national reconciliation and creating conditions conducive to the resumption and success of the political process in accordance with political agreements, Berlin Conference conclusions, and Security Council resolutions. In this regard, we consider that de-escalation remains the top priority. Accordingly, we appeal to all parties in Libya to commit to a permanent ceasefire and to fully engage in the 5+5 Joint Military Commission talks in order to reach consensus on the ceasefire agreement and its implementation in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2510 and 2532. Mr. President, despite the current deadlock in the Libyan political process, we firmly believe in the ability of the Libyan party to overcome their differences and uphold the supreme national interests in a way to bring an end to this crisis and ensure the fulfillment of the legitimate aspirations of the brotherly Libyan people for security, democracy, development, and reform. In this connection, Tunisia welcomes the recent announcement aimed at ending hostilities, breaking the political stalemate, and restoring peace, security, and stability. We consider the conduct of the municipal election in Ghat is yet another promising signal. In the same vein, we believe that agreeing on the top representation of the UN in Libya would constitute an important backing to the international and regional effort to advance the solution and help the Libyan party re-engage in the political process. Mr. President, Tunisia renew its call on all parties to fully commit to implementing the arms embargo imposed in Libya. We also stress the necessity of putting an end to all forms of external interference in Libya's internal affairs and preventing that it becomes an arena for setting regional and international scores. We also express our deep concern over the continued influx of foreign fighters into Libya and specified in Libya's panel of expert recent updates. And we strongly call for an end to these trends and violations that can only exacerbate the conflict and put the region under serious terrorist threat, while recalling the responsibility of the Security Council in this regard. Since the situation remains tense in Libya, we remind all parties of the necessity of respecting international humanitarian law and human rights law, in particular the need of ensuring the safety of civilians and the protection of groups in vulnerable situations such as migrants and refugees. We highly value the efforts of the Humanitarian Country Team in Libya, especially in support of the Libyan National and Local Health Authority response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We stress, however, that a full implementation of the 2020 Libya Humanitarian Response Plan requires enhanced support from the international community. To help alleviating the dire socio-economic situation in Libya, it is also high time to resume oil production and export for the benefit of all Libyans. In closing, Tunisia reaffirms a strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity of Libya, and express once more its determination to support all international efforts aiming at resolving the Libyan crisis, recalling the importance of the role of the neighboring countries and their involvement in any endeavors aiming at restoring security, stability, and peace to Libya. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Tunisie pour sa déclaration et voudrais à présent inviter les États-Unis à prendre la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I would just ask, we're having the same issues that many other delegations are having with being dropped numerous times. If you could go to the next speaker while we work on the connect.
Thank you. Thank you, Rodney. Je voudrais à présent donc donner la parole au représentant du Vietnam. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, puis vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. At the outset, I would like to congratulate Niger on assuming the presidency of the Council this month of September. I would like to thank our fellow ASEAN member, Indonesia, for its successful presidency in August. I thank Ms. Stephanie Williams, Acting Special Representative of the Secretary General for Libya, and Ambassador Gunther Soter, Chair of the 1970 Committee, for their insightful briefings. I would like also to welcome Ambassador Tahe Ansoni, Permanent Representative of Libya, to this meeting. Monsieur le Président, Vietnam continues to closely follow the development in Libya. We remain concerned about the ongoing conflicts, which have resulted in over 300 civilian casualties in the second quarter of 2020. This worrying figure represents a 170% increase compared to the first quarter, according to the United Nations Support Mission in Libya, UNSMIL. The presence of terrorist groups and the continued spread of the COVID-19 pandemic have further exacerbated the situation in Libya and neighboring countries. We are also concerned about the worsening economic situation in Libya due to the ongoing conflict and the current pandemic. On the political front, we take positive note on the recent statement of relevant Libyan parties in calling for a ceasefire and paving the way for election in the coming months. However, it is much regrettable that direct talks between the parties have not been resumed. In that context, Vietnam wishes to highlight the following point. First, the momentum gained recently in the political fronts must be maintained for a ceasefire, to put an end to the hostility and to return to peace talks under 3 tracks in line with Resolution 2510 on the Berlin Conference on Libya. We urge the party to soon finalize the draft ceasefire agreement proposed by UNSMIL and proceed with its implementation. We also note the party call for the establishment of a demilitarized zone in Sirte. In this connection, the collaboration between UNSMIL, regional organization, neighboring country, and other relevant member states will continue to play a key role. We would like to welcome the continued efforts of the member of the International Follow-up Committee on Libya in supporting the resumption of the peace talks. We also welcome the African Union's intention to hold the intra-Libyan reconciliation conference later this year. It is necessary to underline that all efforts should aim at supporting an inclusive Libyan-led and Libyan-owned peace process, and the only viable solution to the current conflict in the country. Second, Vietnam once again urges all relevant parties in Libya to fully respect international humanitarian law and stop targeting civilian objects. The party must ensure the safety of healthcare workers and allow unhindered humanitarian access to effectively fight the COVID-19 pandemic. Further attention and measures must be taken to protect vulnerable groups, particularly women, children, migrants, and refugees from the negative impact of both conflict and the COVID-19 pandemic. We also welcome the efforts of UNSMIL and UN Action Service in helping to address humanitarian challenges in Libya. Third, we reiterate the importance of upholding relevant Security Council resolutions on Libya, particularly those related to the embargo. We share the concern of the Secretary General about the reported flow of arms into Libya in the recent months. We urge all parties inside and outside inside and outside of Libya, to strengthen their commitment and action in adhering to the embargo and putting an end to the foreign interference in the country. Fourth, we would like to commend the continued efforts of Ms. Williams and reaffirm our full support for the work of UNSMIL. In this regard, we support for 12-month extension of UNSMIL mandate. Vietnam will work closely with other council members in this regard. We would also like to reiterate the importance of the long overdue appointment of the new HISG for Libya. In conclusion, Vietnam would like to reaffirm our strong support for the pursuit of peace, stability, and development of Libya. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie le représentant du Vietnam pour sa déclaration et voudrais à présent inviter la représentante des États-Unis à prendre la parole. Ambassador Kraft, you have the floor.
Thank you, Abari, and congratulations on your presidency this month. And a special thanks to Acting SRSG Stephanie Williams for your commitment to UNSMIL and the people of Libya. Libya is at a critical juncture. With UNSMIL and international partners, we welcome the August 21st declaration by Libya's Prime Minister and Speaker of the House of Representatives calling for a ceasefire, demilitarization, resumption of oil sector operations, and a return to UN-facilitated political talks. These Libyan statements represent the hope of the Libyan people that their leaders will turn away from the violence and forge a peaceful political solution that rejects continued foreign interference and preserves Libyan sovereignty. This initiative by Libya's leaders is a positive, courageous step forward that we all should collectively support. Respect for Libya's sovereignty and territorial integrity should remain the international community's guidepost. We oppose any scheme purporting to divide Libya, occupy it, or foist an external political settlement on Libyans. Libyan parties must drive the solution, which will best be reached through inclusive UN-led political negotiations aimed toward national elections. But a political solution will remain elusive as long as foreign backers on both sides continue to fuel the conflict. To be clear, the United States opposes all foreign military interference in Libya, supports UN-led negotiations towards a sustainable ceasefire, and backs an immediate return to a UN-facilitated political process. We have said it before and will say it again. There is no military solution to conflict in Libya. All actors involved in the conflict should abide by the commitments that they made in Berlin and immediately suspend military operations, halt the ongoing transfer of foreign military equipment and fighters to Libya, and allow local authorities to respond to COVID-19 pandemic. We urge member states to continue to share information with the Libya panel of experts concerning potential arms embargo violations. We must make progress toward a lasting ceasefire. We believe finding a demilitarized solution beginning with CERTA offers a practical way forward to build confidence on the ground. There is no place for foreign mercenaries or proxy forces in Libya, including the Russian Ministry of Defense proxy Wagner Group, which is fighting alongside and in support of LNA forces. The United States remains appalled by the reports of mass graves in Tarhuna. We welcome the appointments of 3 members of the fact-finding mission for Libya. The fact-finding mission will assist in holding accountable those who have committed human rights violations and abuses and deter further violations and abuses. Accountability for human rights violations and abuses committed by all actors is key to strengthening the durability of a political solution so that Libyans see a genuine path to reconciliation and justice. This council should consider ways to hold violators accountable, including possible sanctions. We reiterate our strong support for UN Acting Representative Stephanie Williams and commend her and UNSMIL's leadership in facilitating a comprehensive political process and confidence-building measures. As we begin discussion on UNSMIL's mandate renewal, we must not waste this opportunity to ensure that UNSMIL is fit for purpose going forward. We must capitalize on these recent positive developments and ensure that UNSMIL is as effective and efficient as it can be, and that its leadership structure reflects this goal. Reforming UNSMIL now gives us the best chance to capitalize on battlefield changes to bring about a permanent political settlement and reinforce the Berlin process. The United States believes the peace process will succeed in the country, but only when the outside parties to the conflict stop fueling the conflict and support the UN-led peace process, so the opposing leaders reconcile and come up with a peaceful power-sharing agreement that really represents the wishes of the Libyan people. Thank you.
Je remercie la représentante des États-Unis pour sa déclaration. Je voudrais à présent inviter la représentante de Saint-Vincent et les Grenadines à prendre la parole. The floor is yours, Halima.
Thank you, Mr. President. St. Vincent and the Grenadines joins council members in congratulating Niger, our A3+1 partner, in what we anticipate will be a purposeful and successful presidency. We also express our appreciation to Indonesia for their excellent work as president in the month of August. This morning, we will also wish to extend very special thanks to Acting SRSG Williams and Ambassador Suter for their presentations. Libya is at a very critical juncture. The increasingly volatile situation, as well as ongoing regional tensions amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, are extremely worrying. My delegation continues to monitor very closely the unsatisfactory, highly polarized and polarizing circumstances unfolding in and around Libya. We deplore the incessant violence, in particular, the indiscriminate attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructures. We also reaffirm our position that resolving the conflict in Libya is equally crucial for neighboring countries, the wider African continent, and Europe. Mr. President, we welcome the recent call for a ceasefire by Libyans, but remain mindful that previous calls have not been respected. The only path to peace in Libya is for the warring parties to immediately cease all hostilities, agree to the UN draft ceasefire agreement within the framework of the 5+5 intra-Libyan Joint Military Commission, and engage in an inclusive dialogue for a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political solution. It is our firm conviction that there can be no military solution to the conflict, and a permanent ceasefire is key to the restoration of peace and stability in Libya. We reiterate our support for the efforts of the United Nations, led by UNSMIL, the African Union, the Arab League, the European Union, and all other constructive initiatives towards finding a peaceful solution. Further, it has been more than 6 months since the resignation of Ghassan Salamé, and the complexities surrounding the Libyan situation demand the immediate appointment of a new SRSG to advance the Libyan process within the framework of the UN 3-point plan. Peace in Libya requires that the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter are strictly upheld. The proliferation of weapons and terrorist activities in and around Libya, with scant regard for UN sanctions, remain extremely troubling. My delegation calls on all external actors to immediately desist from providing military support to the warring parties. Security Council Resolution 1970 and all other relevant resolutions in Libya must also be strictly implemented. It is unconscionable that Libya has been transformed into a conflict of proxy dimensions, where some seek to advance narrow political agendas instead of assisting in alleviating the suffering of the Libyan people. Libya's territorial integrity and sovereignty should be completely respected. Mr. President, we acknowledge the sharp increase in the number of people requiring humanitarian assistance following the review of Libya's Humanitarian Response Plan 2020, and encourage the international community to continue providing support. We stress that atrocities meted out against civilians, especially against groups made most vulnerable, should not go unpunished. To this end, we call for thorough investigations into violations and abuses for for perpetrators to be held accountable. Similarly, all parties must respect the principles of international humanitarian and human rights law. Simultaneously addressing the multiple challenges in Libya, including ending the almost 10-year crisis, combating the ever-present threat of the COVID-19 pandemic, addressing the dire humanitarian crisis, tackling the economic impediments, and creating the ideal space for reconciliation are indeed taxing, if not overwhelming objectives. However, Libya's ultimate goal of bringing sustained peace, security, and development to its people and the international community's support to keep the process on track must never be derailed. My delegation remains in solidarity with Libya. We renew our commitment to assisting the international community in finding a peaceful solution to the conflict. I thank you.
Je remercie la représentante de la République dominicaine pour sa déclaration. Je donne la parole au représentant de la République dominicaine. Ambassadeur Rosé, vous avez la parole.
Let's commend the Indonesian mission for all the hard work and accomplishments during their presidency during the month of August. In that regard, we'd like to congratulate President Dabarri and all the Niger team for assuming the presidency of the Council this month. You can count on our full support and our delegation. We would like to begin by thanking Acting SRSG Williams and Ambassador Gunther Sauter for the important information shared with us today. In recent days, we have witnessed efforts from the Libyan authorities to reach an immediate ceasefire, as well as the resumption of the political process. We congratulate these initiatives by the Government of National Accord and encourage all sides, in particular the forces of the Libyan National Army, to work tirelessly and in good faith to achieve this goal, which the Libyan people desire and so desperately deserve. Mr. President, the Dominican Republic is concerned about the recent developments reported by UNSMIL related to the protests taking place across Libya. Alleged excessive use of force against demonstrators, arbitrary detentions, restrictions on freedom of expression, and to the peaceful assembly are unacceptable. This, in addition to the increase in hate speech and the incitement of violence, are polarizing even more the Libyan society. It is critical that the rule of law is respected and that citizens' views are freely expressed while easing tensions and restoring peace. Looking forward to the mandate renewal of UNSMIL, the Dominican Republic considers it essential to strengthen the language on the role of young people in peace building in the country, on the protection of human rights, including children's rights, and the fulfillment of the responsibilities and obligations stipulated under international human rights law and international human rights law, with a particular focus on the protection of the most vulnerable. The impact of the war on children, in particular, has been severe. We have witnessed a prevalence of killing and maiming of children, including through trafficking, torture, and sexual violence, as well as the increased number of cases of children in detention in IDPs. This deserves attention. These grave violations need to be addressed hand in hand with accountability. And to that end, sufficient capacity and resources to systematically monitor and verify violations against children are urgently needed. The full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in public life, including in all political processes and peace-building initiatives, is crucial. Women have a role and the right to participate in peace talks and have a say on the future of Libya, reckoning that they are too paying the highest price of the continuing conflict and the rise of violent extremism across the country. Mr. President, We recognize the work of the panel of experts as a fundamental deterrent in the Libyan conflict. We regret that even though the efforts from the panel are tangible and substantial, the countless violations of the arms embargo and other United Nations resolutions continue to increase, which can categorize as nothing less than shameful. We cannot stress this enough. All foreign interference in the Libyan conflict must cease once and for all. It is impossible to promote a peaceful and lasting solution while the parties that commit themselves in international forums and regional initiatives do not comply or match their commitments at the negotiation tables with clear, decisive, and determined actions on the ground. The Libyan people are tired of empty promises, and the international community, unfortunately, continues to disappoint them. Mr. President, to conclude, the Dominican Republic would like to recognize the work of UNSMIL and acknowledge the efforts of the Secretary General regarding the appointment of a special representative for Libya that we hope can be achieved as soon as possible. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la République dominicaine de sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole au représentant de l'Estonie. Sven, vous avez la parole.
Merci, cher Barry. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes félicitations pour la présidence du Niger du Conseil au mois de septembre. And I would also like to congratulate Indonesia for an excellent presidency in August. And I would like to thank the Acting Special Representative, Stephanie Williams, for her briefing, and the Secretary General for the written report on the latest developments in Libya. The coordinated calls for ceasefire by the GNA and the Eastern-based House of Representatives on the 21st of August were a welcome step in bringing Libya closer to peace. But now both parties need to follow this up with concrete action. It is extremely important that the talks in the framework of the 5+5 Joint Military Commission continue at a good pace and result in an effective ceasefire agreement. Furthermore, we fully support the calls from the Libyan parties to cease all foreign intervention in Libya, including the departure of all foreign fighters and mercenaries that are present in Libya. Lasting peace in Libya can only come through a Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process, and we need to create space for it. The only acceptable international framework to support this is the Berlin process, conducted under the auspices of the United Nations. All international efforts to stop the blatant violations of the Libyan sanctions regime must continue. The EU operation Irene is and will continue to make an important contribution to these efforts. The already dire humanitarian situation in Libya has taken a turn for the worse over the past months. We are extremely concerned about the growing suffering of the civilians amid the frequent and significant power and water cuts, and call on all parties to stop the attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. I would like to express Estonia's concern about the growing amount of reports on human rights violations in Libya. All people must be able to exercise their fundamental rights of peaceful assembly, protest, and freedom of expression without having to fear excessive use of force by the authorities in retaliation. All incidents of international humanitarian law and human rights law violations must be thoroughly investigated, and those responsible must be held accountable. I would also like to reiterate Estonia's full support to the work of UNSMIL and the UN-facilitated political process in Libya. We support the further extension of the UNSMIL mandate for another 12 months. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Estonie pour sa déclaration. Je voudrais à présent donner la parole au représentant de la Chine. Monsieur le représentant, vous avez la parole.
Mr. President, I congratulate Niger on the assumption of the Security Council presidency this month. China will fully support your work. I also wish to commend Indonesia for tireless efforts and professional guidance during the presidency last month. I would like to thank the acting special representative, Ms. Williams, and Ambassador Salter for their briefings. I welcome Ambassador Essoni to this meeting. Secretary General's report and Ms. Williams have made clear, and China agrees, that the current situation in Libya is complex and fragile. We see worrying tensions in Sirte and Jufra, serious problems of refugees and migrants, and a dire humanitarian situation. What's worse, the Libyan people are suffering the impact of COVID-19. The international community should strengthen coordination to support all parties in Libya in achieving lasting peace and sustainable development. Let me elaborate on the following 5 points. First, China welcomes the August 21st statements calling for a ceasefire respectively by Government of National Accord and the House of Representatives. There is no way out through the military option, and there must be a ceasefire as the first step towards peace. We now have a rare window of opportunity. All parties to the Libya conflict should effectively implement ceasefire, immediately halt hostilities, resume dialogue within the framework of 5+5 Joint Military Committee, and reach a permanent ceasefire agreement. China welcomes all efforts conducive to lasting ceasefire in Libya and a positive response to Security Council Secretary General's appeal for a global ceasefire. Second, the international community should respect the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Libya, stay committed to the Libyan-led and Libyan-owned political process under the UN framework, effectively implement the outcomes of the Berlin Summit and the relevant Security Council resolutions, and promote the implementation of UNSMIL's three-track solution. We appreciate recent discussions on Libya by African Union and the League of Arab States and their unique role in mediating disputes among the parties. Relevant countries should use their own influence and play a constructive role in encouraging the parties to increase mutual trust and adhere to political settlement. Third, China supports the work of the UNSMIL, and we, in principle, support extending its mandate for 12 months as recommended by Secretary General. Under the current circumstances, UNSMIL should focus on promoting a ceasefire among the parties to the conflict, mobilizing the international community to help the Libyan people cope with pandemic and step up its efforts to assist Libya in making practical and feasible plans for national reconstruction and economic reform, so as to lay a foundation for sustainable socio-economic development. The position of the SRSG has been vacant for 6 months. China calls for appointment of a new SRSG as early as possible. Fourth, it is China's consistent position that sanction is a means, not the end. Sanctions regime should always serve the political settlement. We call on all member states to earnestly implement the Security Council resolutions, avoid military involvement in the Libya conflict and interference in Libya's internal affairs, and strictly abide the arms embargo. Meanwhile, attention should be paid to the negative impact of sanctions on Libyan civilians and third states. Sanctions should not harm the normal life and humanitarian needs of Libyan people, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Sanctions Committee and its panel of experts should act objectively and impartially in strict accordance with the mandate and play a positive role in advancing the Libyan political process. Fifth, terrorism in and around Libya continues to threaten the regional security and stability and causes serious spillovers in the Sahara and the Lake Chad Basin. The international community must stay highly vigilant on this trend and combat terrorism in all its forms across Libya, in particular guide against the cross-border movement of foreign terrorist fighters. Libya must not allow to be the hotbed of regional terrorism. China is ready to work with the international community to actively promote political process in Libya and support its early realization of peace, stability, and development. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant de la Chine pour sa déclaration. Je donne à présent la parole à la France. Nicolas.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je souhaite tout d'abord remercier et féliciter l'Indonésie pour sa présidence de notre Conseil au mois d'août et souhaiter bonne chance au Niger pour le mois de septembre et assurer le président du Conseil de mon plein soutien. Je remercie Stephanie Williams et le représentant permanent adjoint de l'Allemagne, président du comité de sanctions, pour leur action, bien sûr, et aussi pour leur présentation. Nous le rappelons sans cesse, il n'y a pas de solution militaire en Libye. À nouveau, la France appelle à un cessez-le-feu et à une reprise du processus politique, sous l'égide des Nations Unies et sur le fondement des paramètres agréés par les Libyens. Cela doit ouvrir la voie à des élections, à la réunification des institutions libyennes et à des réformes économiques et sécuritaires, lesquelles sont absolument indispensables. Dans cet esprit, les déclarations du 21 août dernier du président du Conseil présidentiel, Fayez Sarraj, et du président de la Chambre des représentants, Aguila Saleh, constituent une étape positive. Ces déclarations doivent être désormais suivies des faits sur le terrain et aboutir à un cessez-le-feu immédiat et durable, à l'arrêt des opérations militaires en Libye, au démantèlement des milices et à la reprise de la production pétrolière. Cette dynamique, qui devra s'appuyer sur des gestes réciproques, crédibles et vérifiables, permettra d'aboutir à une reprise du processus politique. Nous appelons les acteurs libyens et internationaux à tout mettre en œuvre en ce sens, en cessant les hostilités et en s'engageant de bonne foi à soutenir ces développements. Les forces étrangères doivent se retirer de Libye. Ces ingérences ne sont pas acceptables et à cet égard, nous condamnons les interférences et les violations de l'embargo sur les armes dont le nombre a malheureusement augmenté depuis la tenue de la conférence de Berlin le 19 janvier dernier. La France appelle également les parties à poursuivre leurs efforts pour permettre la reprise dès que possible de la production pétrolière et l'allocation transparente des revenus qui en sont issus. Dans cette perspective, ce Conseil doit jouer pleinement son rôle et notamment renforcer la médiation des Nations Unies et de la MANUL. Il doit être uni, ce Conseil, derrière la nomination par le secrétaire général et sans plus attendre d'un nouveau médiateur. Près de 6 mois se sont écoulés depuis la démission de Hassan Salamé. La vacance de la médiation onusienne ne peut plus durer. Pour permettre aux Nations Unies de jouer pleinement leur rôle en Libye, nous soutenons le Royaume-Uni qui négocie actuellement un renouvellement ambitieux pour 1 an du mandat de la MANUL. Nous sommes notamment ouverts à une discussion étroite avec tous nos partenaires du Conseil sur les moyens de renforcer l'efficacité de la mission. Nous proposons notamment de renforcer le rôle de la MANUL pour accompagner un possible cessez-le-feu en Libye, ainsi que pour faire respecter l'embargo sur les armes. La France restera pleinement engagée en faveur d'une solution politique en Libye pour mettre un terme à ce conflit qui n'a que trop duré. Elle continuera, pour ce faire, d'appuyer les efforts des Nations Unies et leur renforcement. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Je remercie le représentant de la France pour sa déclaration. Je voudrais à présent inviter le représentant de l'Indonésie à prendre la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. President, at the outset, allow me to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the UN Security Council for the month of September. You can rest assured of the support of the Indonesian delegation for your presidency. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all delegations for the full support and cooperation extended to our delegation during our presidency last month. I thank Acting SRSG Williams and Ambassador Soter for their briefings and provide our continuing support to UNSMIL and the Acting SRSG. We would also like to welcome her engagement with leaders in Libya as well as international partners. We would also like to take this opportunity to welcome the new chair of the 1970 committee and reiterate our commitment to working together with the committee and its panel of experts. We welcome the committee's informal meeting in July 2020 together with Libya and the wider membership of the United Nations. Such an interaction is indeed crucial to encourage dialogue and a transparent working method and prevent what the Secretary General says, political hypocrisy in international relations. Mr. President, allow me to focus on the following points. First, we support all efforts for peace in Libya. I join the Secretary General in welcoming the recent Libyan calls for a ceasefire and hope these calls will be respected by all armed forces. We expect international efforts, such as the Berlin process, will also play its role to support these calls, and both parties to resume dialogue immediately through the UNSMIL facilitated intra-Libyan 5+5 Joint Military Commission talks. We also welcome the resumption of political dialogue in Geneva last month. We must ensure the preparedness of Libya in carrying out the result of the dialogue, including the planned general election next year. UNSMIL, as the embodiment of the United Nations on the ground, needs to have sufficient resources to guide that process, including its mandate, funding, and political presence. This is why we reiterate our call for all members of the Security Council to proceed with the nomination of the new SRSG by the Secretary General as soon as possible. We also reiterate our strong support to the Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, especially during this crisis of COVID-19. Second, we need to focus our efforts to save Libyan lives. This includes those who are particularly vulnerable. Not only from bullets or bombs. The Libyans deserve to have access to adequate health facilities and there should be ample space for humanitarian assistance. All parties need to fully respect the international humanitarian laws and taking measures to protect all civilians and heed the call for the global ceasefire. Third, the importance of regional roles for peace in Libya. Efforts made by neighboring countries, as well as regional organizations such as the African Union and the Arab League, remain relevant and should be further encouraged. We realize that as neighbors, countries in the region felt the direct impact of the conflict. They should never be left out as they provide a unique perspective for peace. Mr. President, our term as an elected member of the Council is short, and what we do right now will be recorded in history. The people of Libya grew tired of empty narratives that have zero impact on the ground. They want us, the international community, not to meddle, but to find a political solution for lasting peace. At the end of the day, the ultimate question will be, have we been successful in saving lives in Libya? I thank you very much, Mr. President.
You are the only participant.
Je remercie le représentant de l'Indonésie pour sa déclaration. Je vais maintenant faire une déclaration à ma qualité de représentant du Niger. Je voudrais exprimer notre appréciation à Madame Stephanie Williams, représentante spéciale par intérim du secrétaire général en Libye, et à Monsieur Gunther Sotter, président du comité de sanctions 1970 et représentant permanent adjoint de l'Allemagne, pour la qualité de leurs exposés et pour la perspective qu'ils viennent de nous donner de la situation actuelle en Libye. Voisin de la Libye, le Niger est sensible à tout ce qui, en bien ou en mal, touche ce pays, et c'est à ce titre que nous avons accueilli favorablement l'annonce faite par les présidents du Conseil présidentiel, M. Fayez al-Sarraj, et de la Chambre des représentants, M. Aguila Saleh, en faveur d'un cessez-le-feu immédiat. Très peu de bonnes nouvelles nous sont parvenues de la Libye ces derniers temps. C'est pourquoi celle de l'annonce de ce cessez-le-feu devrait nous pousser à dire que malgré le chaos actuel, des signes d'espoir existent. En effet, lorsque les Libyens arrivent à se parler, ils peuvent créer un espace propice à la paix et à la réconciliation dans leur pays. Dans le même ordre d'idées, la perspective de l'organisation d'élections d'ici mars 2021 devrait être saluée et encouragée. Il est évident que la vraie légitimité s'obtient par la voie des urnes et non par celle des armes, transférées en grande quantité en Libye au gré d'intérêts contraires aux aspirations de paix d'une population trop longtemps exposée aux actes de haine et de violence. Les souffrances des populations libyennes sont malheureusement exacerbées par le contexte de la pandémie du Covid-19, dont le nombre de cas a connu une flambée ces derniers temps. Depuis bientôt une décennie, la situation en Libye n'a cessé de se détériorer après plus de 10 ans de guerre. Les Libyens n'ont pas connu la démocratie qui leur avait été promise et à laquelle ils pouvaient légitimement aspirer. Plus grave encore, ils ont perdu la paix et la sécurité et sont aujourd'hui menacés de perdre l'unité de leur pays. Nos appels répétés et nos bonnes intentions sont hélas contrariés par le refus de plusieurs acteurs de respecter l'embargo sur les armes auquel ils ont pourtant librement souscrit à Berlin. La Libye et son peuple ont payé le prix fort. Ses femmes et ses enfants sont tués et par milliers. Ses ressources sont pillées et ses infrastructures détruites, y compris ses écoles et ses hôpitaux, malgré la pandémie du Covid-19. Malgré ces efforts, le secrétaire général des Nations Unies n'arrive pas à désigner un représentant spécial, pourtant si nécessaire pour relancer la seule formule de sortie de crise qui vaille, celle du dialogue politique et de la réconciliation. Il est plus qu'urgent qu'un représentant spécial du secrétaire général soit nommé de façon à ce qu'il conforte la dynamique de la recherche d'une solution politique à la crise libyenne. C'est le lieu pour ma délégation de réitérer l'importance du rôle que doivent continuer de jouer le Conseil de sécurité, l'Union africaine, la Ligue des États arabes, l'Union européenne et tous les autres acteurs concernés pour stopper la dérive actuelle et aider la Libye à redevenir ce pays de paix, de stabilité et de prospérité. Dans cette optique, le Niger se félicite des efforts déployés par le comité de haut niveau ainsi que par le groupe de contact de l'Union africaine sur la Libye. Nous saluons également le rôle positif joué par la mission d'appui des Nations Unies en Libye qui, malgré le contexte difficile, à travers ses bons offices et ses appuis multiformes, s'attelle à rapprocher les belligérants conformément à son mandat. C'est pourquoi nous sommes favorables à une prolongation du mandat de la dite mission pour une nouvelle période de 12 mois. Le Niger salue également le rôle joué par la mission Irini dans le cadre du contrôle de l'embargo sur les armes, conformément aux résolutions 2473 et 2292, tout en estimant qu'une attention particulière devrait être accordée à la situation des migrants africains se trouvant dans les camps de détention et qui sont souvent tués lors des bombardements ou sinon utilisés comme des combattants ou des boucliers humains par les différents groupes armés dans ce pays. De plus, le Niger est d'avis avec le secrétaire général sur la nécessité de revoir la politique de débarquement en terre libyenne des migrants et des réfugiés interceptés en mer. La volatilité de la situation sécuritaire et la vulnérabilité dans laquelle ils se retrouvent une fois débarqués devraient nous interpeller. Sur le plan économique, les graves conséquences du conflit ont engendré une détérioration des conditions de vie des populations libyennes et réduit la capacité des autorités à subvenir aux besoins sociaux de base de leurs concitoyens. C'est pourquoi nous encourageons la levée du blocus pétrolier sur l'ensemble du territoire, car la relance de la production générera les ressources dont la Libye a besoin pour faire face aux besoins que j'évoquais tantôt. Pour conclure, aujourd'hui plus que jamais, la Libye a besoin de réconciliation. Elle a besoin du génie de tous ses fils, sans exclusive aucune, pour bâtir à nouveau cette nation forte et digne qu'elle a toujours été. Si nous sommes attachés au triomphe de la justice, nous sommes encore plus désireux de voir la paix revenir en Libye, car sans cette paix, il n'y aura pas de justice. En effet, aux crimes commis hier viendront s'ajouter ceux d'aujourd'hui, encore plus graves et plus inacceptables. La Libye a plus que jamais besoin de notre solidarité. C'est le moment d'agir. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Je reprends mes fonctions de président du Conseil. Je donne à présent la parole au représentant de la Libye. Monsieur l'ambassadeur Taher, vous avez la parole. The floor is yours, Ambassador Taher.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brother Abari, I wish, first of all, to congratulate you for assuming the presidency of the Presidency Council for this Security Council of this month. I also would like to wish you all the best. My thanks go also to Ms. Stephanie Williams and UNSMIL team for all the efforts you're doing during these difficult times. And also thanks to Ambassador Schauter for his briefing on the Sanctions Committee. Before I proceed, I would like to request the Secretariat and the Presidency of the Council to really consider the issue of translation so we can be able to speak in our language in Arabic in the future sessions. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, we would like to reiterate our firm position in support of all endeavors of peace, stability, and sparing of bloodshed in Libya. Moreover, I wish to remind you that we have responded positively on several occasions to calls for dialogue, reconciliation, and de-escalation, the most recent of which was the announcement of the President of the Presidency Council on 21st of August regarding the ceasefire. This announcement came from our political and national responsibility and the ongoing crisis throughout the nation and the region in general, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, which has started to spread widely and rapidly in Libya. If we do not address these issues and work together to find proper solutions to these challenges, all these factors will have more negative and destructive impact, threatening international peace and security. Here, it must be recalled that achieving this ceasefire requires demilitarization of Sirte and Jufra, in addition to the withdrawal of all foreign and mercenary forces from the two cities and all regions of Libya. The main objective here is to fully restore Libyan sovereignty over Libyan soil. For this end, an immediate reopening of all oil ports and fields should be enforced, as their closure was not secret, directed by foreign actors. So enough with jeopardizing the resources of Libyans, as the amount of loss to date is estimated by $9 billion, besides the severe damage to the infrastructure of oil installations and facilities. Accordingly, we would like to point out that we welcome the international and regional support for the ceasefire decision that was also supported by neighboring countries, especially those that have begun to back down from supporting the aggressor and his militias, mainly after being fully convinced of his failure and the failure of his military scheme, and they understood that a political solution is a necessity. Moreover, we welcome the statement of the political leadership in the East regarding the ceasefire and the need to resume oil production. Yet, until this moment, we did not see any response or clear position on both matters from the military groups represented by Haftar and his militias. However, this isn't the first time. Rather, hostile messages have been appeared to the surface in opposition to the peaceful statements as expressed through their spokesperson. Additionally, further violations were carried out by those forces, backed by mercenaries targeting the cities or the sites of our Libyan army forces stationed west of Sirte with Grad missiles in the past 72 hours. In another provocative step, which is expected. Hence, we still confirm our commitment to the ceasefire, but we reserve the right to respond to such acts of aggression, and we will defend ourselves against such attacks and any moves or threats at the right time and the right place. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at a pivotal point of the Libyan crisis. While we are trying together to establish stability and peace, the specter of conflict and war still exists due to the insistence of the aggressor and his associates not to comply with the national and international will and put an end to fighting. Therefore, the Security Council, along with the international community, must demonstrate seriousness in implementing its resolutions and activate the ceasefire and compel the other party to officially accept it. Everyone is wondering, what are the guarantees for implementing the ceasefire without repeating a similar scenario that took place before the Ghadames conference last year? What is the use of a 5+5 talks if Haftar did not announce his commitment to the ceasefire agreement? For this reason, we should not repeat the mistakes of the past, and this council must assume its responsibilities by pushing and holding those obstructing the ceasefire accountable. We did our part. It's time for you to do yours. The most common sentence I'm hearing from most of the briefings today was that 5+5 talks must resume. Oil blockade must be lifted. Ceasefire must be respected. Human rights violations must end. But what we don't hear, what if those things are not done? Who will be held accountable and how? Ladies and gentlemen, the discussion leads us to the crisis afflicting my country and the exacerbation of living and economic conditions and the proliferation of weapons due to the division, conflict, and external interventions that have lasted for years. The discussions leads us to the importance of finding comprehensive political solutions aimed at treating the root of the crisis and not deflecting or working around it. Therefore, we recall the statements made by the President of the Presidency Council on several occasions regards to the importance of expediting the organization of presidential and parliamentary elections by March 2021, according to an appropriate constitutional framework agreed upon by Libyans alone, to end the transitional stages and the state of chaos. In this regard, we reiterate that the people solely have the right to self-determination. We can't afford reproducing custom-made political bodies to fit certain individuals, neither repeating the mistakes of the past 10 years. Let's have the political sphere open to all and give the chance for all competitors to compete. We believe that in the event of full commitment of the international community and with the full support and mandate given to the United Nations and the coordination with the rest of the regional organizations, this electoral process will succeed. And we have seen many successful experiences in several countries in the world to build on. And what Ms. Williams briefed us today on the success of municipality elections is a proof and shows the eager of the people to have this process and democratic process take place. It is only then Libya will be able to end the crisis of legitimacy, unify institutions, and deal with other challenges, in particular security, economic, and basic services, and implement reconstruction projects and start the stage of development and prosperity for the Libyan people. Therefore, we call upon the United Nations to expedite the process in appointing the new UN representative, and for this council to reach consensus, because there are those who try to take advantage of this void to undermine UN efforts. We don't mind the proposals presented as assigning a special UN envoy and a head of mission. What we really care about is just to need this process to conclude quickly. And through the mission, we ask to resume immediately a comprehensive political dialogue. And most importantly, expand the participation to include, in addition to the bodies of the political agreement, the effective powers and groups on the ground, including actors across the political spectrum, regions, and social components, regardless of their affiliations and ideological orientation. Without any exclusion, as happened in previous occasions, all Libyans need to participate in such comprehensive political process. The only exception would be those who are involved in and convicted with crimes responsible of bloodshed of innocent Libyans. During this dialogue, and in addition to agreeing on the political and electoral process, discussions must take place on ending all form of foreign interventions, launching transitional justice, reparation, the return of the displaced internally and externally since 2011, all within a national reconciliation plan. And here we reaffirm the importance of involving the African Union with the presidency of South Africa in order to help with this national reconciliation plan. Ladies and gentlemen, human rights violations that have occurred and are still being carried out by outlaw militias that don't believe in democracy and call for the return of tyranny are a major factor in the state instability. Today, we are talking about all violations by any group and anywhere with no exceptions. In this context, we all remember the atrocities of these militias, starting from the war on Tripoli to the targeting of civilians through indiscriminate bombing and the use of mines and mass killing. We have all witnessed the mass graves that were discovered in the city of Tarhuna, the last of which was only found a few days ago. New criminal acts have been added. On the 26th of August, groups affiliated with Haftar's forces, initiated arrests of several citizens of the Gaddafi tribe in Sirte, carried out by the so-called Tariq bin Ziyad militia, with the help of mercenaries, attacking their homes, threatening women and children, and have assassinated with cold blood Mr. Nasser Awidat al-Gaddafi in front of his house. Several other and similar arrests and kidnapping occurred in the eastern cities, along with seizing people's lands and properties. In this context, my government would like to emphasize that it will not stand idle about these or other violations anywhere, and will fulfill its duty towards its people and calls on the United Nations mission and the International Criminal Court to include these violations in their investigations and to work to stop these systematic criminal acts, which demonstrates the intention of these militias to destroy the country, sow discord, and work to prolong the crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, my government affirms its support to the right of citizens to peaceful demonstrations, guaranteed by the law and in line with the existing procedures. In this regard, the demonstrations in several Libyan cities in the past days were merely of legitimate demands, despite the attempts of distortion. On the top of these demands was the fight against corruption and the corrupt. Hence, my government affirms that its main objective is to protect these demonstrations and give them the necessary freedom of expression, and denouncing any attempts to suppress them by force. And investigations are ongoing towards reports of a number of possible suspicious arrests, and make sure they are released immediately. Meanwhile, the government will not allow the exploitation of some individuals or groups to divert these demands and rights, to create chaos and exploit them and distort them, these basic rights of civil state we aspire to. Corruption, with no doubt, has contributed to the deterioration of the economic situation and services. That's why the government is response proceeded with a number of measures to fix this matter. Most important was the decision to implement local governance by finalizing the legislative framework, delegation of local authority to municipalities, and introduce a local revenue system. All these measures are meant to improve services and support local governance and end centralized decision-making. These measures, for sure, are not enough, and there is still a long way to go. And we assure all that we won't defend the corrupt, and we ask all relevant sovereign institutions to perform their oversight role in this regard. In conclusion, and once again, we reaffirm our belief to embrace peace and reach a peaceful solution that spares the bloodshed of our people. So we call on all Libyans to set aside our differences that will only prolong the suffering of the people. Let us together end all type of foreign interferences and embrace a national will and a comprehensive national reconciliation, as this is the only way towards stability and unity and assure the sovereignty of the state. Thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Libye pour sa déclaration. Nous voici arrivés au terme de la partie de cette séance diffusée en direct.
If we could disconnect briefer 3, please.